Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to our reward hour for February. Today, I'm excited that we're going to be talking about how to define equal work and how to justify pay gaps in light of the upcoming EU Pay Transparency Directive. I'm really excited to be hosting Anita Lettink. I hope I pronounced that somehow correctly.
That was perfect. Yes.
Thrilled that you're here and that we all get to benefit from your expertise. It would be great if you introduced yourself for the audience, and then we'll take it from there.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Anita Lettink. I live in the Netherlands. I've been working in the HR and payroll tech industry for about 25 years. I'm a corporate speaker on the future of work and pay. Have written 3 books, one about payroll, one about the Pay Transparency Directive, and one about explaining the pay slip to young people. And about 3 years ago, I was made aware of the EU Pay Transparency Directive, and I thought, no one is ready for this. So then I started to talk about this, and I obviously wrote a book and a newsletter. And so I try my best to make sure that everyone is on time.
I mean, we're going to be diving into how ready you believe companies are at the moment, just on the cusp of it sort of being switched on. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vaso. I'm the Chief People Officer here at Ravio. Ravio aims to make compensation work well for everybody. Whether that's HR directors, reward leaders, any leader, any people manager, anyone at all. It's a painful space, so we want to help make compensation better for all of us. A few hygiene things. So we're happy to take questions on the during the session. You'll be able to pose questions either in the chat functionality or in the questions functionality. For me, it's in the bottom right-hand side of my screen. I think it's the same for everyone. I'll try to introduce the questions as we get them. If I can't, then hopefully we can take them at the end. But yeah, looking forward to a really to a discussion with all of our guests and Anita, of course. Super. Well, let's get started. So, I mean, look, clearly the EU Pay Transparency Directive represents one of the biggest shifts in the European compensation space certainly in our generation. And it's not only about reporting requirements, it's fundamentally changing how we structure roles, how we evaluate work, how we justify pay decisions internally and externally. And so today we'll see where the conversation takes us, but hopefully we dive into where companies actually stand, how ready they are, and more importantly, how we tackle the foundational work that makes the compliance with the new directive possible. Great. So I think we have a poll that I will try and publish. The question. So I'll just hit publish. I think it should just come up on your screen. The question is, where is your company in their EU Pay Transparency Directive journey? Completed readiness assessment. We're implementing or close to done. We're currently assessing what we need to do. aware of it but haven't started preparation, or we're not sure where to start, feel free to hit any buttons there, and we'll sort of see where it takes us. And yeah, really interested, Anita, in whether this aligns with what you were expecting. So up to now, 44% assessing what we need to do.
Yeah, and that tracks with what I'm seeing in the market. I think what plays a role here is that even though the directive has been around since 2023, the local legislation has been delayed, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that means that companies are holding off until the local legislation is published, so they know what to do. Where I always say that, in fact, if you read the directive, it's very clear, it's very straightforward, and you'll have about 90% of what you need to do in the directive, and the other 10 will probably come from that national legislation. So if you're still in the assessment stage because you don't have access to your national draft, then please just read the directive and work from there.
So the directive, gives the direction, but so that's a starting point. And do you think there is, do you think there are differences in country, like where they, so where are companies in their journey, and are different countries more ahead or more behind?
Yeah, so there was an interesting report that came out last week about where are countries, but this was a global report on pay transparency. And a large number of countries are working on pay transparency initiatives simply because it's also a cultural corporate thing. It's not just a legislative thing. But in Europe, only 9% of companies are more or less done. And that means that the other 90% of companies are still in the process of assessing what needs to be done, and are running their programs. Now, realistically, the first deadline is June 7th of this year, and then the first reporting, like the official reporting deadline, is June 7th of next year, 2027. The interesting thing, there's 27 countries in the EU that are subject to this directive. 11 have now published a draft, which means it's not finished legislation. It's a draft. 10 have announced that the draft will come this month or in March. So in those countries, there's nothing concrete yet. And there are some really large countries in there, like Portugal, Spain, Denmark, but also some small ones, Slovenia. And then there are also 6 countries that have not made any official statement, so we have no idea where they are at, which is an interesting situation. Fortunately, both France and Italy, which are from a numbers perspective really big, are sort of in the stage of publishing their requirements, and we know a little bit more now about their requirements than we did like, let's say, a month ago, both in terms of fines but also in terms of how they will group equal work.
So I mean, it's really interesting to see the spread of sort of preparation in the different countries. Kind of in our brains, or certainly in my brain, I think about, the EU as one big group, but obviously, there's a huge spread of preparation for this really important directive. We have a question from Adelina. How can these 9% companies be done if the majority of countries have not yet published a draft of the transposure into local regulation of the EU directive?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. What you can look at for like in broad terms, like we mentioned, in the directive really sets the tone, and the country transpositions must follow that direction and specify things like what are, for instance, where do you submit your reports, or what are the fines. But the basic principle of pay transparency, defining equal work, having job architectures in place with job grading, salary bands, and then trying to figure out what your pay gap is, that is not something that is new. We have been able to do that for quite a while. So it could be that based on a transposition, a country, for instance, mandates that certain pay components must be in and others don't have to be in. But that is, in the end, a matter of adjusting some reporting. So understanding if you have pay gaps or not can still be done outside of local legislation. Like I mentioned, you'll be 90% done, and there's another 10% that you might need to adjust. But from what I've seen of these draft legislations is that they stick fairly closely to the directive with some local flavors, in the sense that the directive also states that if you already had equal pay reporting in place, and those requirements are more stringent than what is in the directive, then you have to keep those more stringent requirements. And for instance, France has something in place with also with where you count a number of points and you then report on points, like up to 100. So that type of reporting is then taken into consideration also for pay transparency legislation.
Okay, got it. And would you say, like, broadly, it feels to me that, surely some company sizes, and specifically maybe some industries as well, will just naturally be better prepared, either because their data is in a better spot or because they have someone looking at this, at compensation. Would you say that's fair? So are certain company sizes or industries better prepared, and and to what extent?
And the answer is yes. And in this case, you might think that it's the large global companies, and to an extent that is true. But what you also see is that in Europe, a lot of companies and industries are subject to collective labor agreements.
Yes.
And in those collective labor agreements, it's typical that, for instance, there's job classification, there's job grading, but also there's salary bands. And so that means that if you are subject to a collective labor agreement, you don't have to embark on those types of projects because you're already working within this existing structure. And so then it becomes more a matter of checking if people are really sit in the structure based on the job that they have, based on the grade that they should have, based on the requirements, if they have the right salary, but not so much starting from scratch with job descriptions and architectures and all of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we've got a bunch of questions. I'm just going to take them in the order that they came in. Sorry if it doesn't make sense.
Or maybe we can. Like continue the conversation for one more, like especially about the equal pay part or equal work part, and then come back to the questions. And I'll be happy to answer questions offline afterwards, because I see that there's a lot coming in.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? So why don't we continue with the equal pay? And then let's try really hard with the equal work conversation, and then try really hard to leave as much time at the end as possible for questions. Okay, super. Okay, we've got a plan. So yeah, so I think thinking about defining and evaluating equal work, obviously the directive requires us to identify which work is of equal value. But on the other hand, you can't just group by function or rely solely on, whatever market benchmarks you might be using. So, how do we actually do this in practice? I'll launch another poll, but in the meanwhile, Anita, how do we do this?
Well, fortunately, this has been done before. And so it's not like we are starting from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And there have also been a number of court cases where employees took their employers in front of a judge and complained about equal pay and then were awarded a payout or not. And so from that history, we know that certain methods to grade jobs, like particularly point factor methods, hold up in court because they are very explainable. Now, what does that mean? Basically, you look at every job and you break jobs down in factors that you pay for. And that can be qualifications or skills or efforts or responsibility or working conditions. You can define whatever you want in those in that factor group. And then you assign a value to each of those factors. And typically you break factors down into sub-factors. For instance, when we talk about qualification, you can talk about experience, education, and ability. So for instance, 25%, or let's do it, 30% of the value of a job is assigned to qualifications. So 30% is 300 points. And then you divide those 300 points over sub-factors like experience, education, and ability. And you can each assign them 100 points, or you can say, no, experience is more important. So that is 150 and the other two are 75. So you have a lot of freedom in defining the factors that contribute to pay. But in the end, what I always tell people is make it very explicit why you pay what you pay. Do that in objective terms and make sure that that explanation is repeatable so that when employee A comes to you and asks for an explanation, that is exactly the same as when employee B comes to you, so that when they talk amongst each other, the story holds. And it's not like, oh, I heard this and I heard that. No, the explanation needs to be exactly the same. The factors, the sub-factors, the weighing, that all needs to be exactly the same. And that is how you get to like a job evaluation that holds up when you talk about it in front of your employees, that managers can explain, but also that stands up in court, because I'm pretty sure we'll see some employers being taken to court about this once all this gets out.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like, well, basically almost like any comms plan. Great that we have the freedom to define how we're defining equal work, but of course it needs to be defensible, justifiable, and repeatable, basically, so that employers can be with their best foot forward in the case of a not nice litigation or otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, got it. And then, if we look at the poll as well, it seems, and as you say, we've done, the foundational work has been done before. So things like, job architecture and leveling framework, which 61% of the respondents have said they already have, which is great. But how would well, let's assume we have the job architecture, the frameworks, the bands, etc. How would we know when we have structural or foundational issues that actually need to be fixed before commencing this like really big bit of work?
Yeah, typically what I advise companies to do is once you have this structure in place, start running reports because you need a little bit of experience. This is not something that you have done before and that you know instinctively, okay, here we have a problem and this looks like a gap, but actually it isn't. We all need to learn how this works. And even if you don't have all the data elements in place yet, start running your reports so that you understand what you are looking at, that you can also understand what data fields you are missing so that you have to add that in order to come to a comprehensive pay and compensation report. But also that you find early on where gaps are really an issue and where they can be explained by the factors that we just talked about. Sometimes and this is what I see very often, if you work for a company that's a little bit older and that has done things like mergers and acquisitions, you probably have different pay structures. And now suddenly you start to compare these and you come to the conclusion that you have differences because of history, or because some people were compensated as a consequence of losing some of the benefits that they had when they worked at the company that was acquired and that were now turned into, for instance, base salary. So those things can explain pay gaps. Does not necessarily mean that you need to do something about it, but it can be an indication that you need to do something about it. And maybe to be very precise, the first pay gap that you look at is the unadjusted pay gap, and you might be very shocked to find that you have like an unadjusted pay gap that is far larger than the 5% threshold that is allowed. But once you start to take into account all these factors that you pay for, your adjusted pay gap, which means you've now explained the differences, might be a lot smaller. And that is also why you need to start running reports fairly quickly. It's just because you need to start learning what you're looking at. And that takes a little bit of time.
So the reports almost provide the sort of baseline for, an educational piece, but also for starting to build the story of what needs, what needs fixing. Okay, and you've shared the example of like a structural issue that would need fixing. For example, if there's been a merger or some sort of acquisition, and that that combination hasn't resulted in sort of fair pay amongst workers. Is there any other example that sort of comes front of mind in terms of a structural issue that would need fixing?
I think another thing that needs fixing is that you have to be very deliberate about what you pay for, but then also how you talk about this. Now, so the directive very often talks about objective terms as opposed to subjective terms. So going forward, you might sometimes say things like, she works very hard, so she should get a raise. But that is very subjective, because what does that mean? Where in objective terms, you would say, oh, she increased sales by 80% last year. Everyone else increased sales by 10%, so she's clearly a high performer, so that means her pay raise is now higher. And I think many of us are not so used to talking in very objective terms when we explain pay raises. There's something else, like you could also say, well, this job, the people that do this job need to earn more because this job is very hard or it's very important. But the future way to define this is when we look at the benchmark, and we benchmark this job against the similar jobs in our industry or in our region, we see that pay for this job, average pay for this job is, I don't know, £50,000 or €50,000. That is now how we pay about jobs, instead of this job is very difficult, so it should pay more. So everyone else earns €40,000, so we should pay 50 for this job. That is not what we can do anymore. So everything that we talk about when it comes to pay must be objectified. And that means, once again, it's the same for everyone, no matter if you're a man or a woman or whatever group you belong to. It's defensible and it's repeatable.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think will be the most challenging scenarios when justifying any pay differences? So it's clear to me, the objective versus subjective treatment. But I can't help but think that there will be situations where it's really hard to justify the pay differences, but they are, they are there and they are justifiable. What are some examples of that?
Well, what can happen is that you will find individuals that have lower pay or a higher pay, and that is often a consequence of market conditions. So people that have worked for you for a long time typically get like a 2 or 3% raise every year, and then people that you bring in new come in with certain demands for their salary, or have a certain package that you want to match, or maybe you really, really want to get them in, so you pay them a little more. And that means that in many companies, the gap between tenured and new employees is larger than it should be, based on, based on the fact that they're doing equal work. And this is something, when you discover it, that you must repair. You cannot let this stand. So you will find instances of people, and I would suggest take a hard look at the people that have worked for you for the longest, because that is usually where you find the gaps that really need fixing. And yes, you must have a budget set aside for these individuals, where you have to fix the pay gap, because otherwise you will be in breach of the directive. And this is another thing that people often ask me. So can we use our pay for performance budget to fix this gap? And then, I answer, well, in theory you could, but that's not a very great message to the people that have worked very hard and achieved all their targets. So if you can do this as a company, not every company can do this, but if you can do this, make sure that you have 2 budgets, one that is for pay for performance as normal, and the other one to fix any gaps that you might find.
Got it. And this is where the reporting that you mentioned earlier also comes in, because with adequate and frequent reporting, you'll be able to faster see those big, the big deltas amongst longer tenured employees. Okay. And
from the corner of my mind, I see a question that I get a lot about, does stock count as variable pay, and must that be reported, and what about benefits? To both questions, the answer is yes. Everything that you pay an employee, it does not matter whether it is in kind or in cash or in stock or in future, this all is part of compensation. There will be some countries that will tell you exactly which pay components you must report on. They've already come out and said, we'll come out with a list. But when you read the directive, it is very broad. Everything that you give employees is part of compensation and must be taken into account. Yeah. And so you have two types of reporting. So you have reporting on base pay, that is one, and the other one is on compensation. And for both, you must have the mean and the median.
Okay, which makes sense and is not hopefully not too hard to do. We do have some interesting questions around to what extent and how stock counts. So we understand that it's in stock, but like liquid stock that I can sell tomorrow is different to shares in a private company that might come to nothing or might lead to a great exit.
Mm-hmm.
Equally, is it stock at grant or stock that has vested in that relevant point in time? Any help there?
Yeah, so this is one of the more, I would say one of the more difficult topics. Where I expect that we will see more local guidance because there are so many variations. So that is why I want to be a little bit careful to come up with a definite answer. I think we don't know yet exactly how we need to report on it. It is clear that we need to include it. The exact way how we need to do that will come later. As an example, I live in the Netherlands. If we have stock options, we must report that for tax purposes. And I know that in the past, when I worked at international companies, that was always a little bit of a strange request because in other countries you don't do that. And so they always had to create special reports for the people that lived in the Netherlands so that they could assign a value to the stock options that we could then use for tax purposes or tax reporting. It might be something like that. I don't know exactly how countries will deal with this. What I will say, apart from the valuation, also here, if you assign people in a certain role stock options, in what shape or form you do that, you must ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in that scheme. That does not mean that that everyone in the company must have access. But if, for instance, you say, I have directors at level 8 or something that have been granted stock options, and there are 2 that did not receive that as part of the package, then you have a problem. Because everyone now in that role, if people are a director, if they are at level 8, then they need to be able to access the same compensation.
Got it. Well, I mean, related, what would count as a justifiable reason? Well, what, if anything, would count as a justifiable reason for pay differences amongst, say, level 8 director level? If delta amongst base, variable, bonus, whatever it might be, what could be justifiable?
A difference in performance. You can still pay for performance. It's just that you must be very specific on, like I mentioned, why you pay what you pay. If as a company you do not want to pay for experience, that's fine. But then no one should be paid for the experience that they bring. Or if you do not want to pay for location, that's fine too. But then no one should get like a cost of living allowance. I don't think, some people think that the directive is very restrictive, where in fact it is not. But what it does force you to do is be very specific on the pay elements that you want to make available to employees and how you want to make them available to employees. You can still say everyone, up until level 4, no one gets a bonus. That's fine. But then no one ever gets a bonus. And so you have to, if you define it that way, then you have to stick to it. You can still say, we pay salespeople a bonus if they score above their target. But then all salespeople at that level need to be able to attain that target realistically, and maybe some can overshoot it. But you cannot say to all the salespeople at that level, well, you get a target, and if you overshoot it, then you get 150%. But for you guys, no, it's only 125. That does not work. That is clearly, a breach of pay.
Yes.
The pay for performance still works.
Okay. So it sounds like you need a principled approach that is documented, justifiable, scalable, and basically where there's no exception, unless the exception is performance related and therefore justifiable, not this person kind of feels like a nice man, it needs
no, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like I see in the chat, what about recognition awards? You can still do those. Just make sure that the reasons why people get recognition awards are objective, not because they're a nice person, but because they did something unique that is recognized by their peers. And these peers could potentially also get that award if they did something unique.
Yes.
And so make it very explicit and objective. And I know that maybe takes some of the surprise away from it, but that is the way it is, because the flip side of that is that in the past, many people have been unable to get these types of awards simply because of the fact that a manager did not like them, or the fact that they belong to a certain group that never received these recognition awards. So whenever you think about the restraints of the directive, also think about the consequences for people that maybe were underpaid or under-recognized in the past.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I have one more question for you, and then hopefully we can get to as many as possible, because we've got so many coming in, which is great. So if you could give the people on the call, just one bit of advice when it comes to being prepared, the one thing you want them to take away from this call, what would it be?
Yeah, it's actually two things. The first thing is always keep in mind this mantra of, can I explain why we pay what we pay? Because as long as you can do that, then a lot of your problems will disappear, or you will see problems happen before they actually happen. And the second one is, start running these reports, because they will tell you so much about the pay structures in your company, and they will also help you find where there's areas or pockets of potential under or overpay that you need to do something about. So two types of advice.
Well, that's great. If we double the amount of advice, clearly there's a lot we need to take from this session. Okay, let's go through some of the questions. The sequence of the questions might not make sense, but hopefully the questions are valuable for everybody. And then if we're not able to get through everything, Anita's very kindly said that she's happy to get to them offline. Obviously, answers will be at a high level. Great. So
yeah, can I pick one? I saw one appear for this Spoina. Does the subject matter expertise justify a difference? Yes, it does, because that is very quantifiable. And if you are in a market where technology roles, you say in the chat, are paid higher than most of the other roles, you can say so in your pay philosophy. For instance, you can say that all roles are benchmarked against the 50 percentile of pay ranges, but technology roles, because of labor shortages, are benchmarked against the 75 percentiles. That is something that is very objective. Again, you can look at the labor market. You can see that these are roles that are hard to fill, and therefore they require a premium. And when you do that, that will also allow you to go back to the corporate average if that labor shortage disappears. So once again, I would never increase all the salary bands, but I would always attach them to percentiles in external benchmarks, so that you can pay a premium temporarily, but once the labor shortage is over, you can go back to the, let's say, the normal payment. Although I don't think that the labor shortages for technology roles will disappear very quickly. So
no, for sure. We have a question from Gosia. Sorry if I mispronounced it. Which is about basically the difference between justifiable differences. So the question is, how can we quantify the justifiable percentage difference for various merit-based factors? For example, we get that we can pay someone more for their higher performance in their field, but does that mean it's okay to have a 15% gap, or is a 60% gap, or an 80%? What's the degree of reasonableness that we can justify?
Yeah. So I cannot say anything about what is reasonable. That depends on what is normal in the country, or maybe in the organization that you work for. And the directive does not say anything about this. So if you feel that someone's bonus can be 200% because of a certain attainment, you can do that, as long as everyone in that role can copy that behavior, and as long as you then also will pay this 200%. So once again, it comes down to being very clear on how your pay program works, and making sure that it is the same for everyone, and that everyone and that you can explain it in the same way to everyone. But it doesn't not say anywhere on on limits on salary bands, or how much difference there should be between salary bands, or the size of bonuses. Nothing like that.
Okay, got it. And then one of the questions that we got around work of equal value and comparable roles was the following. Post-leveling, what is the recommended best practice to answer equal value? Because I think we've all interpreted that this is like a multidisciplinary, what's the word? Recommendation, and so it's challenging to understand how we can level a marketing person in the same like so easily in the same vein as an HR professional, or a finance professional, or a tech professional. So yeah, how do we answer equal value?
Yeah. So once again, I'm going back to make sure that you use something like a point factor method that makes it very tangible. I'll give you an example. How you said something. What you often see, and I also see a little chat pop up about differences between men and women and functions, and that ties into this conversation as well, because what you often see is that technology roles command a premium, or HR and marketing roles do not. But the point factor method states clearly that you must base that on the criteria that you define, but also on the contribution to the company. And then it becomes a little bit more difficult to say, well, HR's contribution to the company is not as critical or stellar or whatever word you want to use as IT or marketing. And that then means that when you start thinking about jobs that are interchangeable, for instance, a marketing analyst, an HR analyst, and an IT analyst could probably take each other's role. And the topic would be different, but the analytic capabilities that they have to be able to perform that role at that level should be more or less the same. So once you are running these analyses, you must not only look at the function, but you really must look cross-functional if roles that are somewhat equal are also measured equally from a points factor based method. I know it's a little bit complex, but it takes away some of the reasoning to pay people in certain departments more than others. However, and like I mentioned before, a labor shortage or the inability to attract people in certain roles can be an objective qualifier to pay some people more. And so that does not mean that you adjust the points or the level, but it means that because of an external circumstance, you adjust the salary permanently, or I would always recommend temporarily.
Got it. That's difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult, and it requires some thinking, but always go back to that point factor method really helps because you can then start to talk about roles in factors and sub factors and assign points to them. And that is a much better way to say that, in fact, someone who works in IT and someone who works in marketing perform similar activities, have similar experiences, have similar educations. So why is there such a wide range in payment?
Yes, yeah. Okay, Susan has asked a question about, is there an issue with explicitly saying that we match to the 50th percentile? For instance, if there are less companies and incumbents, and the higher level drops significantly from the level below, I may ensure a certain progression between levels occurs due to weak data. Should we say we target the market midpoint so it doesn't lock us in to always having to use the 50th percentile where it doesn't make sense?
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, yeah, I mean, most companies align to the midpoint. And then based for certain roles, for specific criteria, they will attach, to the 25th or the 75th. It is up to you. There are some companies that deliberately go a little lower. There are some companies that deliberately go a little higher because that is the reputation that they have in the market. And it's a way for them to attract candidates. So where you want to sit compared to the benchmark is really a corporate choice. or an organizational choice.
Got it. Okay. Maria, just going back to the clarification on the stock question that we had. She's saying, so the question is, rework of equal value is job architecture where pay is based on job profile, job level, and geo enough to be compliant with the directive? Is there anything specific to look out for and avoid as justification, i.e., for example, a department? How can you compare a software engineer to a marketing manager? We sort of covered that. And how are we expected to define comparable roles?
Yeah. So to the first part of the question, you are completely free to define your pay criteria. So if you want to pay for geo, that's fine. If you don't want to pay for geo, I also know some companies that say, you know, we employ software engineers across the world. The salary is 75,000 euros or dollars, and you choose where you want to live. And in some countries, 75,000 euros is a lot of money, and in other countries, it isn't. So those companies just pay for the role. That's all. Other companies have a much more granular approach where they say, okay, if you live in San Francisco, you'll get more than if you live in Amsterdam because cost of living is so different, and we need people in both of these locations or in a lot of locations. Once again, this is up to you. This is not where the directive tells you how to run your business.
Okay, so
now I think there was another question attached to that, but I forgot what it was.
Well, we've sort of covered it in how do you compare like a software engineer with a marketing manager, and how do we define comparable roles? But we talked about the points-based system.
Yeah. Also, maybe one thing where when you start to think about roles, all of the reporting that you do is at the national level. So for some, you must do it on an entity base. Italy, for instance, has said that if all your employees fall under this same collective labor agreement, you can roll that up into one report for your total company. That means that you can still make slight differences between countries. So it's not that you must have this global structure that applies everywhere equally. You can if you want to, but I'm not sure. So I see some companies do that, but I also see some companies unified at the global, at the national level, and that is allowed.
Okay, that's really helpful. Question from Susan: do we need to revisit how M&A comp process works? For instance, if the acquired company has a pay philosophy where they are at the 75th percentile, but is assimilating into a company with a pay philosophy at the 50th, in many EU countries, we cannot reduce pay to normalize to the acquiring company's pay practices, but it would take many, many years of no merit increases to normalize. Can we use past pay practices as an explainable, justifiable factor?
Yeah, this one I cannot answer because no one has tried this yet.
We're going to see, and we don't know yet.
We're going to see, yes. Yeah. We don't know. No, there is no explanation in the directive or no direction on how to deal with this. For now, I would say, make sure that you make very clear that this happened and how this works so that you have an explanation.
Yes.
But so if you have one person that is on top, that is outside, you always find outliers. And with outliers on your salary bands, the assumption typically is they need to move on. they need to be promoted or they need to find something else so that they once again fit into a new salary band that is aligned with the level that they have. In this case, it's a little different because, as you mentioned, we cannot assume that people will remain if the outlook is, well, you will not get an increase until the salary band catches up. And if it's the difference between 50 and 75%, that will be years. So that would be very unsatisfying and will probably lead to people leaving the company. But right now, I do not want to. I mean, I don't know what the direction will be for that.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see what happens, and I guess case law will will set a precedent, or maybe we get more direction.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I'm sorry, there were so many questions. It's hard to sort of pick.
I think we have time for one more before it's
maybe
4 o'clock.
So Maria has asked, at a legal conference the other day, they mentioned that employees can request the average of compensation in a detailed manner, including base, variable, bonus, and all pay components. Is that correct?
That is directionally correct. This is what we call the category of worker report. So if I am a software engineer level 4 and there are 10 people in that same category that are also a software engineer, I can ask for a category of worker report. And that will show me where I sit. I'm going to assume that you know your salary compared to everyone, compared to the average of the other people. So then I know, because I probably know these other 10 people, so I can make some assumptions on where my pay is. Now, keep in mind that if you are starting to use salary bands with quartiles, also there you need objective terms to put people in these quartiles. And so first, employees need to accept that they are, for instance, in the second or in the fourth quartile based on the criteria that are set for those salary bands. And then they can look at the averages. But yes, everyone has the right to ask a category of worker report.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And do I have this last one is interesting. I'm going to take that. Do I have a view on GDPR and minimization? I do. And this is going to be very interesting because some countries have said privacy goes over pay transparency. So if the group is too small, you cannot report it. You need to group them into a larger grouping. But in the draft of the Netherlands, pay transparency goes over privacy. So even if you are one of a team of 2, if you ask for a category of worker report, the employer must make it available to you. Now, I don't know if in the final transposition that will remain, but in the draft it was very clear that pay transparency was given more importance than privacy. By the way, this is the only country where I have seen that. In other countries, this was not the case. So it could also be a cultural thing.
That's really interesting. Okay, I think we're bang on time. So that's all we have time for today. Anita, thank you so much for this informative session. Sure. We got a ton of questions. We on Aravio's side will think about how if Anita will have us, we will do another session, or we can do an offline session or other content, because clearly this is a subject where people feel that they need your expertise, Anita. Thank you. Thanks again.
And I think Yeah, sure. And it's also a topic where, as we get closer, we will have more clarity.
Yes,
There's currently some things that we just don't know. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
hopefully time will also help us with our
Yeah.
questions. In the meantime, we've got to prepare. Thanks also to the
Yes,
audience for
absolutely.
being so engaged, and we'll do our best to figure out a way to get to get answers to your questions where we can. Okay,
Yeah.
folks, thank you, and have a great afternoon, and see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.